So, a lot has taken place over the weekend, and there's a lot to talk about, to discuss. And with me today is Swig, as always. Jonah tried to make it, little had issues again, so we'll play that one by ear. But Swig's back. We have a lot to discuss. First things first, we're going to be bringing up the MLB regular season. This is the last week of it. The end's near, and most of our teams are making it, but others are not. So we'll get to that. And also, we have our playoff outlook on those teams, and then we have the Giants and Bears recap over on Sunday. That was an interesting contest between both teams. And then we have the Jets lose again, so we'll get to that one as well. Swig, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I have some opinions that I'm ready to share.
I also have very, what's the word for it? Very bold opinions, and something that I need to let off my chest. So anyway, the Cubs are going to be heading to the postseason most likely, unless it's a big collapse, which they're prone to do. But then again, you're playing the Pirates, so let's see what you're doing there. So coming in right now, I mean, they could have clinched by Thursday. You don't know. But the Cubs are coming in, and that offense has been broken. It's been broken since 2018. You saw it at the end of 18, end of 17, all of 18. And then towards the end of 19, it was a mess too. And that roster still has the same players that have been on the World Series winning team, but they're just not getting that production out of the lineup. And it's starting to make me very upset. Swig, what are your opinions on the Cubs just real quick before I transition back?
Well, I think the Cubs are definitely going to be in some danger when the playoffs start. They are in no danger, realistically, of missing the playoffs or even losing their division, barring a really 2007 Mets-style collapse here, because they're up 4.5 with 7 to go at the time we're recording this. But their lineup, like you said, has struggled all year. Their rotation has been a little better, I guess, than we would have expected, especially with Darvish's renaissance year. But you see so many of the big names and big bats in that Cubs lineup struggling, and Rizzo and Baez and Bryant and Kyle Schwarber. So guys from both sides of the plate, it's taking away some of the balance that the Cubs had in that lineup. If they don't start to get it together soon and get at least a little momentum here in the last week of the regular season, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and Chris Bryant is a guy who only has 2 home runs and 5 RBIs on the year, which is absolutely pathetic. He always misses times due to injuries. You know how I brought that up in future or past episodes. And he can never stay on the field. At least this year, he's been dinged up and can't play. So what I'm saying, I don't care if the guy's fully healthy. He's not hitting over 200. He's not driving in runs, and he's not putting the ball out of the ballpark. Why isn't David Bote in the lineup playing third base? I want David Ross to show that he has the plums to play him, David Bote I'm talking about, in a situation like that. David Bote's a better fielder. He has a .438 batting average with two outs and runners in scoring position, which is the best on the team. He has 27 RBIs, which is 1 away from the lead, and he's a part-time player. Meanwhile, he cannot get in the lineup. I understand the Cubs can't get on base, but at least put David Bote in the lineup, who's capable of producing in those clutch moments to actually drive in the runs that they can. So I really want David Bote in the lineup, whether it's in the DH role, third base. I'd love him at third base, maybe second base, when Caratini has to catch Darvish, because you would have Contreras DH then. But I want David Bote's bat in the lineup in the postseason. If not, David Ross is making a massive mistake, and it could end up to the Cubs being eliminated.
Well, we saw the Cubs offense struggle big time in a couple of elimination games. I believe it was the 2018 playoffs, where they had game 163 against the Brewers and then the wild card game against the Rockies. And they scored a total of 2 runs in 22 innings. And obviously that's not going to cut it. And you can definitely see the formula repeating itself here for something like that to happen again. The Cubs are not doing the best job maximizing their lineup here. And even if they do, it seems like their offense is likely to struggle here unless they catch lightning in a bottle in a best of 3 game series. So the margin for error is way too small, especially in that first qualifying round against whoever they end up playing, to keep one of your more productive and consistent hitters on the bench.
Yeah, and they keep playing. I mean, they win the games against bad teams, and they can't win against the good teams. You saw them lose 2 out of 3 to the Twins and get walloped in 2 of those games. And they're not really producing, especially at the plate against the good teams. Sometimes they get good pitching, especially out of Darvish in those big games. But, I mean, they're beating teams like this, the Pirates, and they're playing them, and they're whooping them. And I'm like, once I start to get confidence, like, oh my gosh, we're finally rolling. You're playing the Pirates. It's JT Brubaker. It's all these no-name pitchers that you're facing that you're finally scoring 4 runs a game, which a capable offense can do, but they can't do it. So I don't know where I feel on them. I really hope they catch lightning in a bottle and start to take off right now, because it's an interesting stretch, because I don't think this core is going to be intact for the next year or years on. So this might be their last little ride with this team, and I hope they can get hot and at least make a run out of it. The pitching depth really scares me in the rotation as well. You have Darvish, who started to come back down to earth in his last 2 starts. Hendricks is a soft tosser, and so is Mills. They are giving Quintana the ball on Tuesday, so we'll see how that plays out. But I don't love the depth. The offense is inconsistent, and unless they all start clicking on all cylinders, I don't see them making it.
Well, the depth is going to really get tested if the Cubs do advance to the divisional or championship series, because they took away the off days in those rounds after games 2 and 5. There's no travel anymore because the rest of the playoffs will be in a bubble. That's going to test everybody, and it's going to keep every team from using their bullpen so aggressively like they usually would in the postseason. So these starters are going to have to at least give them some length, because you can't pitch your A relievers 3 games in a row here or 4 games in a row, because they're going to need a day off just like they would in the regular season.
That's a phenomenal point right there, because, like you said, I thought of it more of a starting pitcher thing. You can't bring him back on – you'd have to bring him back on short rest if they pitched 1 or 2 games in that series. But the bullpen, I mean, they're working every day. I mean, the guys that really come out of the pen and have great seasons, like that Royals bullpen you think of a couple of years ago, they would have been in danger right now, getting out there every single day. And the no off days is an interesting strategy. I mean, I don't really like it, because I'm an old school guy. I like the formatted of the postseason like that. I like the wild card game being 1 game on 1 night, to where you can focus all your attention and get all the hype in there. I looked at the playoff schedule, next Tuesday and Wednesday, they're playing. There's like 5 or 6 games on the dial for both games. I'm like, what am I going to do here? I can't have my eyes on 6 televisions. I mean, what are we doing? So I want to transition over to the Yankees. How do you feel about the Yankees coming into the postseason, and how you felt they did in the regular season?
Well, the Yankees definitely had a very interesting up and down type of season. They had a lot of injuries again. They did officially clinch a playoff spot yesterday with the Mariners losing to the Padres. So at the very least, we will be playing a best of 3 against somebody. But as much talent as the Yankees have, they are very streaky and very inconsistent. They lost 15 out of 20 at one point, which put them in legitimate danger of missing the playoffs. And to their credit, they did respond by winning 10 straight after that to safely get themselves back in. But you can definitely see a formula for the Yankees to just easily lose 2 games and be out in the qualifying round, especially if we end up playing that series on the road, because our home and road split is one of the more drastic in the league. And the Yankee offense is talented as it is pretty sporadic. And it seems in a normal game that either everyone's got the bats going or nobody's got the bats going. And the more likely situation in a playoff game to succeed is you need at least 1 or 2 of those guys to be ready every day. And if all of these guys are cold, we don't have the pitching to hold up.
Yeah, and one name that really sticks out for me to see how the Yankees' success will go down the road for this postseason is Deivi Garcia. He's a guy that's really came in and stabilized that rotation and given them some talent out of the pitching staff that hasn't had too much. I mean, the talent's there. They just haven't been able to execute. So Deivi Garcia is a great name to watch. Hopefully he can really shore up that rotation going into the postseason.
Well, Garcia is going to be one of the biggest X factors, especially if the Yankees do advance to the divisional round. In the best of 3, the Yankees can most likely line up Cole obviously for 1 of the games. They'll most likely have Tanaka and Happ at this point for 2 and 3, because Jay Happ is surprisingly solidified his starting rotation spot after 2 mediocre years. But to his credit, he's been fantastic of late through 8 shutout innings in his last start, and has gained some trust, because the rest of the Yankee rotation after Colin Tanaka doesn't have any experience. As much as Garcia has looked great, he's made 5 career starts. He hiccuped a bit on Sunday, and that is to be expected. But he does have the poise and the confidence where I don't think the moment will be too big for him, but it's very possible that the Twins lineup or whichever lineup we end up facing will be too much for him to at least hold us in the game. And I don't think can trust Garcia to throw more than 90 to 95 pitches, unlike some of these other guys. I think he's less likely to get stretched out to the 110, 120 that we might see from the others. So that will put a lot more pressure on him, and it'll make a much smaller margin of error for the bullpen as well whenever they come in.
Yeah, and switching gears over to the offense, you look at a guy like Luke Voit, who's really had a phenomenal year, could be the AL MVP, leads the league in home runs, and has played a pretty solid role in that offense that has gone bleak at times throughout the year. And I hope to see him continue that stride into the playoffs, and maybe they get some more production out of DJ LeMahieu in a contact role. And then some other guys can piece it together. You have the playoff experience with the Brett Gardner and all the guys that have been there. So hopefully the postseason experience will actually step up and prove to be a factor for the Yankees. And hopefully Gary Sanchez can finally break through.
Well, the one thing with the Yankee lineup, even when they are productive, is they're extremely right-handed heavy. And one of the few things that the emergence of Clint Frazier has done, he is finally the everyday left fielder, which he earned. And that is absolutely the right move. But that moves Gardner to a bench role. So the Yankees' most likely lineup, if everyone remains healthy for the next week into the playoffs, is going to feature 8 right-handed bats and Aaron Hicks as a switch hitter. So if there's a tough righty that we face, as of now, we would be facing the Twins. That seems to be a decently likely outcome. We face a tough righty like Jose Barrios, and he gets on a roll, getting the sliders on the outside corner. We're going to strike out a lot. And that could definitely be a challenge. Now, on the bright side, if a team has a really good left-handed reliever, the Yankee lineup could definitely neutralize that threat a little bit, more than most other teams could. But the vast majority of these pitchers we're going to face are going to be right-handed. So they're going to have to hit same-handed pitching. And then Sanchez obviously has not had a very good season overall, but he has been a lot better in the last week or so. I still want to be as patient with him as possible, despite his flaws, because there are not a lot of catchers in the league who can produce like him when he's healthy. And if he gets any confidence going into the playoffs, even if he just hits 200 and gets 2 or 3 big home runs, it'll make a massive difference in a series. And Gary Sanchez essentially won us the one game against Boston on Friday night by himself. And I was mostly encouraged, not by the home run that tied the game, but by the fact that he finally went the other way on a 2-run double earlier. He seems to be finally easing off of trying to pull everything. And if he can keep that approach in the playoffs, he will be a lot more effective.
Yeah, I was watching that game on Friday night. It started to get nervous in the ninth. You had Chapman come in there, not the ninth, maybe it was the 10th. I can't remember, but they had runners on second and third, one out. That Boston team is just bad. But anyway, Yankees hold on and win that one. That was a great win for them. And you mentioned Gary Sanchez. He's a guy that I thought going into spring training before everything happened, I thought he was going to have a fantastic breakout year. You saw all the weight he lost. He looked phenomenal. I saw pictures of him just raking on the Steinbrenner field, and I thought, all right, this guy's going to have a nice year and put it all together. But everything sort of took a turn for him, so hopefully he can gain that success in the postseason.
Well, if you look at the Yankee lineup, he will most likely be either hitting 7th or 8th in the playoffs. And if he is your 7th or 8th hitter, it does show how much depth the Yankees do have. But at the same time, there is a bit of a drop-off. When you get to the 6th or 7th spot, Aaron Hicks hasn't been great this year. He's drawn a lot of walks, but hasn't really done much else. And then you get guys like Urshela, who I do really, really like, that gets forced down a little bit in the lineup. But at the top there, you have LeMahieu, who's been great for the 2 years that we've had him, and he's a free agent after the season. So the Yankees have a big decision to make there. But he's hitting 360 and leading the American League in batting average again. And Voit has been a legitimate MVP candidate here, stepping up big time while Judge and Stanton and Torres were all out of the lineup, and we've needed everything that he's provided.
Yeah, and to go off what you said a little bit earlier about the right-handed dominance, I thought a name that the Yankees should have tried to acquire at the deadline was a Brandon Belt, who's had a fantastic year for the Giants. And he could play first base, great defensively. You move Voit to a DH role unless you thought Stanton would have played there. So I guess it didn't make too much sense, but I thought Belt would have been a great lefty stick in that lineup. You mentioned DJ LeMahieu, and his contract's coming up, like you said, at the end of this year. I'm going to give you a question. Would you rather have DJ LeMahieu's consistent stick that drives in runs and is a great defender and just gets on base, or would you rather have the flair for the dramatic, the great Francisco Lindor, even if you have to trade for him?
Oh man, that's a rough one. Honestly, overall, I would keep LeMahieu at this point. I really would. Nothing personal against Lindor. LeMahieu's versatility has been a very underrated part of his value to this team. We signed him originally to be a utility infielder. Amazingly enough, we were supposed to start the 2019 season with Greg Bird at first base. We're supposed to have Torres at second, Troy Tulowitzki
Yep.
at third, and Miguel or at shortstop, excuse me, and Miguel Andujar at third. And obviously that did not work out at all. And not only was LeMahieu playing every day very quickly, because Tulowitzki only lasted, I think, 5 or 6 games, but he was playing all over the infield except for shortstop. He almost immediately became the leadoff hitter and an indispensable, consistent part of that lineup. And I do think long-term he would be a little bit cheaper because we could probably get him for a 3 or 4 year contract compared to what Lindor is going to get. But I wouldn't rule out a possibility that we end up with both of them eventually, because I do think the Yankees are going to make a big run at Lindor. Long term, they could put LeMahieu either at first or third, move Torres back to second where he's better defensively, and have Lindor as a big contract as a switch hitter as well, instead of committing big money to one of the other guys, like maybe even Judge.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Yankees. I don't see too many landing spots for Lindor. I thought maybe Cincinnati, but a small market, and they're sort of spitting around with something there. But I don't really know where he's going to end up. But New York's a great fit for him. I think he would succeed there. So the last team that we're going to talk about today, the Mets they're not making the playoffs, so we're not going to bring them up. But they did have a decent regular season. There were some ups and downs. The pitching really let them down. But anyway, we're going to talk about the Chicago White Sox, the biggest surprise of this year. And I actually predicted them to make the playoffs in our first episode. But I don't know if they're going to make it too far. I don't know. What do you think of the White Sox? You think they're going to make a run?
Oh man, if you want to talk about the unpredictability of the playoffs, I don't think any team represents that better than what the White Sox are going to do. The talent is absolutely there, unquestionable, but they do not have the playoff experience. And historically, a team that doesn't really have that is unlikely to go all the way in their first year. I'd make a similar point about the Padres in the National League. They have a ton of talent and a bright future as well. But am I convinced that they're ready to roll right through the playoffs in their first try? Not so much. I do think it's more important than almost any other team for the White Sox to make sure they wrap up the division. They have not wrapped that up yet. The Twins are only 2 games behind them. They really need that home field. I think it would be a huge comfortability factor. Help ease some of these younger players into their first playoff experience. And I am worried about the consistency of the White Sox bullpen going into a deep playoff run. The further they get in, the more I think that some of those arms, especially in the middle innings, can get exposed. With the relative inconsistency of the White Sox rotation, they're unlikely to get these guys consistently going 6 or 7 innings into games. So I do think that would eventually catch up with them.
Yeah, and you talked about the Padres not having technically the experience in that role, but they do have some veterans on the roster that have been in the big stage. You have Eric Hosmer, who's won a World Series, Manny Machado, who's also played for the Dodgers in the postseason in that one weird year that he got dealt for 1 year. But then Tommy Pham with the Cardinals, and there's a couple guys that have had the experience, but the White Sox coming in, I think it's good to get their feet wet in a postseason situation like this. I do think they have the talent to make the run, obviously, but like you said, the bullpen is a question mark. I think they're going to be good. I don't know if they're going to make it too far. They kind of remind me of, like, I think Jonah and you both said the 2015 Cubs, and that also applies to the postseason. That postseason roster for the 2015 Cubs wasn't that experienced. So what did they do going into 16? They got rid of Starlin Castro, Jorge Soler, brought in veterans that have had the experience with Ben Zobrist and Wade Davis. No, Wade Davis was the following year. But anyway, they brought in Ben Zobrist. John Lackey was a part of those teams, and I think it was a smart move for them to go ahead and make those transactions to get the leadership of Jason Hayward as well. But the White Sox, I think, can make a run, and I'm excited to see what they can do. I think they have a better shot of going farther than the Cubs.
They do have a more productive and consistent lineup at the very least, but I think the pitching staff questions do exist with both of those teams, or they're going to exist with almost every team in this playoffs, because pitching is a really hard commodity to come by, and to have a consistent rotation and consistent bullpen is almost impossible. Yankees, for example, almost always seem to have a pretty good and reliable bullpen, but they are always looking for a starting pitcher. The White Sox, I'd say right now, the bullpen would be the bigger priority. They do have a couple of guys on that team the Edwin Encarnaciones, the Dallas Keuchels of the team that do have some playoff experience, absolutely. And they will have some value to that team. But the core of the White Sox is absolutely their youth, their young lineup, and a couple of very talented young pitchers like Giolito, for example, who threw a no-hitter a couple weeks ago. So the talent is absolutely there, but the experience is not for most of the core of that team, and we'll see how quickly they can adapt to it.
You also mentioned, I actually mentioned Deivi Garcia being the big factor for the Yankees' success in the postseason, and I think is a similar situation for Dane Dunning for the White Sox. And he's a guy that really came in and pitched well out of the University of Florida. He's a great arm, and I think he could do really well for the White Sox going down the stretch. But if he doesn't perform, then I think they could be screwed, because outside of him, you can't really get too excited about any of the other arms outside of him, Dallas Keuchel, and also Giolito.
Well, to me, I'm going to throw out a different comparison here. To me, a guy like Dane Dunning or even Garcia, not in terms of how talented they are for the future, but what they're going to be for their teams this season, reminds me of what Randy Dobnak was for the Twins last year. You know, he absolutely came through and had a very, very solid regular season for that team. But the Twins really did not have a reliable number 3 starter. Arguably, they didn't even have a number 2 starter after Barrios. You know, they threw out guys like Odorizzi, and this is after Michael Pineda got hurt. But, they bring in Dobnak for game 2 of the Yankees-Twins series last year, and the moment was almost immediately too big for him because the Yankees had 7 runs by the 3rd inning. And the lack of experience will absolutely be a factor in the postseason for these pitchers. They may have a good start to, or two throughout a playoff run, but it's not going to be as simple as pitching every 5th day against mostly teams like, say, the Royals would be. They're going to be facing the better lineups in the American League to start, and then, possibly the World Series if they get that far. The lack of experience and the talent throughout the lineups on almost every contender is eventually going to take its toll on pitchers like that.
Yeah, and the deciding factor here is also interesting with the Cubs and the White Sox. Both aces, Lucas Giolito and Yu Darvish, both have personal catchers. So you're going to see James McCann in the lineup catching Lucas Giolito for the White Sox starts. And you're also going to be seeing Victor Caratini putting down the signs for the Darvish start. Do you think that has any factor? Obviously, James McCann is a much better player, and obviously he could draw some more starts, but what do you think about the 2 personal catchers?
I honestly think the personal catcher does need to be a part of the lineup. If it really is that much of a mental boost for these pitchers, leave them in there. And the Yankees are going to actually have that same situation. I was going to point that out. Garrett Cole is the Yankees ace, and he's pretty much got Kyle Higashioka as his personal catcher at this point. And as much as I do like Sanchez, if Higashioka can help Cole through, have a dominant start like we saw Garrett Cole in the playoffs last year for the Astros, if the Yankees are going to have any chance of making a deep playoff run, we're going to need that Garrett Cole to show up. A good Garrett Cole with Sanchez is frankly not going to be good enough, because outside of maybe Tanaka, you can't really trust the other arms in the Yankee rotation to have more than 1 or 2 good starts in a row. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on for them as well.
Last question for the Cubs. Who is that pitcher that you think could make or break their run? Is it a Jose Quintana or an Alec Mills? What do you think?
No, I'm actually going to go with Kyle Hendricks on that one. He has been their most, I'm not saying that he's the most likely to fizzle out and have a bad playoff run, but he is definitely the most likely one besides Darvish to be consistently good throughout the playoffs. And I understand that Darvish has faltered a couple of times in the playoffs before. We saw the 2017 World Series Game 7 wasn't his best moment, but throughout the regular season, Darvish and Hendricks are their best and most consistent pitchers, and they would both need to be good and consistent throughout the playoffs for the Cubs to advance past the divisional round.
Yeah, and one last thing I'm going to bring up before we transition to football. This is my boldest take probably ever on this show, because I'm saying a timetable on this one. I think the biggest deciding factor and pitcher for the Chicago Cubs, if they make a deep postseason run, is left-handed pitcher Braylon Marquez. You're like, who's that? He hasn't even made his MLB debut. I think he goes Adalberto Mondesi style and makes his MLB debut in the postseason. He'll make a postseason roster for the Cubs before he makes the MLB roster. And I think they're hiding this kid down in South Bend right now. He's a left-handed pitcher who's 21 years old, throws 102 miles an hour, and he's going to come out of that bullpen and just light him up. No one's seen any tape on him, except for single A baseball. And I think they're going to rush this kid to the bigs and hope that he can just light it up right there.
That would definitely be a bold move. I'll give you that. That would definitely be bold. The thing is, I mean, just thrusting a kid in there who has not had any even regular season experience. If you want to talk about a moment overwhelming somebody, that could definitely be that moment for Marquez. Just want to throw that out. It's very true that the other teams won't really have the tape on him to study up. But at the same time, Marquez isn't going to have the resources to say, oh, I faced these hitters before, and there's a margin for error here because I'm going to get thrown in either up or down by 6 runs. The way you're describing, it's not going to work out like that. So he's either going to be great or he's going to get absolutely torched in about 5 pitches.
Yeah, it could also do irreparable damage to his career as well if they were to try something like that. But, I mean, if you're in a short window to win, why not roll the dice there? One last
just ruin a kid's career and try to win a championship. Give it a shot.
Yeah, they tried that a couple times. But anyway, the Islanders got eliminated in the playoffs. Slig, what do you think about them? Barry Trotz, I think, is a great head coach for them, and I think he did his best job. But obviously they came up short.
Oh, thank God. No, all jokes aside, the Islanders had one hell of a run throughout the playoffs. I was very impressed with them. Their defensive structure really, really took over in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. We started to see a couple little cracks in the Flyers series at the end, but for the most part, they were very dominant, limiting other teams offensively, but the Lightning just have too much offensive depth. Even without Stamkos throughout this playoff run, they eventually wore them down. And we saw by the game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals there, the Lightning finally seemed to find something that worked because they scored 8 goals and the offensive momentum really carried through for most of the series. All of a sudden they're getting 30 or 40 shots, but the Islanders still do have a pretty bright future here. But at the same time, they have a couple of questionable contracts and I'd say a lack of exceptional top end talent outside of Barzal. So they don't have a ton of really high end pieces like that or guys with super high ceilings. And eventually these grinder type of guys like the Cizikas and Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck, they aren't really worth that much in today's NHL. And while they do have some value as defensive forwards, other than when they're on the penalty kill, they really do kill possession numbers for a team that has the puck.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think they showed so much fight there. I wish they could have been able to pull it out because obviously you being a Rangers fan, you wouldn't like to see it, but we could have had ourselves a champion here on this show. But anyway, or at least playing in a final. Well, hopefully we get that in baseball. But anyway.
Yeah, why can't we have it in baseball instead?
Yeah, let's have a Cubs Yankees or a White Sox Cubs White Sox. Who knows? The Mets will not be attending the playoffs this year. I don't know if anyone got the memo on that. The team got bought. That's new. Anyway, New York Giants against the Chicago Bears. The 2 teams played each other. We cover both teams, so we're just going to go at it from both sides of the ball here. And the key factor that is the takeaway is the poor injury to Saquon Barkley losing his ACL. Sterling Shepard also got banged up. David Montgomery got banged up for the Bears but returned in the game, and he's sort of been struggling with injuries a little bit. But the Giants lose 2 stars for an extended period of time, it appears.
Yeah. Being a Giants fan really is fun this decade, huh? That's 7-0-2 starts in 8 seasons for the Giants. And yeah, I didn't expect to win a lot of games. I think I predicted 3-13 or 4-12 a couple episodes ago. And I'm going to stand by that here, especially with the injuries. But my goodness, is it really too much as a fan of a horrible team to just have our star players not get injured? But, I mean, my goodness, man. Barkley having the torn ACL. He also had a partial tear of a meniscus. So he's without question out for the season. We'll see if he comes back at full strength in 2021. But so much for Daniel Jones having his full complement of receivers for the first time ever, huh? This is the first start he ever had where Barkley, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, Darius Slayton, and Golden Tate were all playing, and 2 of them got hurt within the first half, and the other 3 didn't really do much.
Yeah, it was a sort of a disappointing day from the Giants. They showed fight late. I thought they were actually going to come up and beat the Bears, but it's definitely huge to lose a player like Barkley in this situation. There were a lot of injuries that took place in the NFL, and I'm sick to my stomach seeing all these 49ers that went down, and then of course, all these players, I mean, with no fan noise, it just makes the agonizing pain of an injury even worse because you just hear them wincing all over the ground. So it's not good to hear those things. And I just pray that everything's working out for them. But the Giants, I think they're a team. It's really weird because if they do, without Saquon Barkley, end up having the worst record in the NFL, do you do you think they trade that pick? I mean, you can't trade Trevor Lawrence, can you?
Ooh, man, that would be an interesting choice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, number one overall is definitely more of a possibility now than it was before the Bears game. But I would be surprised if the Giants pick outside the top five, one way or the other here. If you have the first pick, it's got to be tempting. We saw what the Cardinals did, in a somewhat similar situation. They draft Josh Rosen at number 10 in 2018, struggled through a pretty horrible season that had a lot of factors from the top of the organization down that basically sunk that season big time. The coach and owner didn't even agree on what defensive scheme they were going to run, for example. They bottom out, get the first pick, get Kyler Murray, and have some immediate results here, especially to start 2020. Do the Giants try to go a similar path? I wouldn't put it entirely past them. I would still be surprised if the prideful and egotistical Gettleman gives up on Daniel Jones after 2 seasons, regardless of how this goes. But if we do end up trading a high pick like that, we need to get an absolute truckload back. And even then, it wouldn't be enough if the other team who we trade with ends up with a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I would think the price tag for Trevor Lawrence would be at least 3 first-round picks, or at least 2 at least, because, I mean, he's a generational talent. And Mel Kiper, I think it was, or maybe it was McShay, have him on the big board with the highest grading since Andrew Luck. So he's an interesting player, obviously the number one pick, no matter who it goes to, whether it's a trade or whatever. If they don't take him and they have the number one, it's not a good idea. We'll recap the Giants-Bears here in a second, but I want to bring up one point. Devontae Freeman was in for a workout with the New York Giants, and I'm going to be frank here. If Devontae Freeman signs with the New York Giants, I think his career's over. It's sort of bold to say, but here's a guy who really hasn't been able to get the yards per carry behind a pretty poor Atlanta offensive line. If he goes to the Giants, he's going to be smacked behind the line of scrimmage countless times. You saw Saquon Barkley only has 10 yards in 5 quarters this year, and that offensive line cannot run block at all right now. And I think it would just destroy his career if he went there.
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've seen the Giants, a team that's won less games in the league than since 2000. Excuse me, I'm gonna start this again. Sorry.
Paul Perkins.
Oh, Paul Perkins. Fuck you. Oh, I remember. Now, if Devontae Freeman ends up with the Giants, I wouldn't be surprised if it absolutely limits whatever career he might have afterwards. We've seen how much dysfunction the Giants organization really does have from the top down as well. And it's not just the GM. We've seen some questionable moves from ownership, giving some of these coaching regimes too much time to just further dig a hole in the ground. So, and we've seen a couple other careers kind of go to die here. Remember when the Giants had Brandon Marshall a couple years ago? Everyone thought it was a solid signing, and he plays 4 mediocre games, drops 7 passes, and injures himself in week 5. And then he never played again after that. So I could see Freeman being a similar situation. Honestly, though, even as talented as Barkley is, the Giants' offensive line is very young, very inexperienced, especially at the center and right tackle positions. So generating a solid running game is going to be a very tall task, whether it's Devontae Freeman or not. I think the more likely situation in the short term is we go back to Wayne Gallman, who's kind of been the forgotten man in New York. He actually had a pretty decent rookie year, I thought, and I think he's a solid back, but he was actually a healthy scratch or an inactive in football, I guess, against the Bears. And we literally had Dion Lewis as the only healthy running back, playing the rest of that game after Barkley went down. So the running back room there, Freeman's a different style of runner than Lewis, but neither one of them are going to resurrect their careers behind this offensive line.
Yeah, Matt Nagy was over on that other sideline licking his chops going, oh my gosh, I'm scared. they're running the ball with a 5'8" running back going between the tackles. That's what I do with Cohen, and I think they're going to win now.
Oh yeah, that was mean right there. No, absolutely. I mean, Deion Lewis, I thought was a little bit better than his final stat line will indicate, and he is a better pass protector than Saquon Barkley, if nothing else. So that might help the Giants form a couple more pass pockets, which will have some value. And Lewis did have the Giants' only touchdown on the day with a between the tackles run. So he might be a little bit better equipped to go between the tackle than Tariq Cohen is. But with the Bears' very formidable defensive front, it's going to be very difficult with a bad offensive line to generate more than 2 or 3 yards a carry. And we saw guys like Khalil Mack, obviously, and Akeem Hicks had a huge impact on the game. Robert Quinn made a couple of big plays. And then to a lesser extent, saw guys like Roquan Smith and Eddie Jackson making a big impact in run support.
Yeah, Eddie Jackson voiced his frustrations after the game with some questionable call that happened there. But so it was a weird game because both of these teams, you see the Bears in week 1, they have the phenomenal first half or the phenomenal second half and win the game with a bad first half. Now you see them in week 2, great first half, bad second half. And you look at the Giants, they had a good first half in week 1, I'd say, or at least decent. And then in week 2, they had a good second half. So both of these teams, you put it together, have played one good full football game. And one team's 2-0, one's 0-2. And I think the Bears' record is much better than the team they are. But, I mean, they're finding a way to win a game. And Trubisky's looked like dog crap in one half and phenomenal in the other half. I mean, they got to find the consistency there. David Montgomery had a huge game out of the backfield receiving and running. And I thought he had a great game. If they continue to utilize him and if he can stay healthy, I think he'll be huge for their success. But what are your takeaways from Giants Bears?
Well, I'll start from the Bears' perspective. They did basically have the exact opposite game they had in week 1. Frankly, the Giants dug themselves a huge hole in the first half against the Bears. So the game should not have been as close as it ended up. I do like the fight the Giants showed, especially after 2 of their better offensive weapons went down. But from the Bears' perspective, their defense still has a lot to be proud of there, even against, let's say, a flawed offensive product. But Trubisky's inconsistency against, let's say, a dog shit secondary for the Giants here outside of James Bradbury are very baffling to me. Trubisky in the first half looked outstanding, and the 17-0 halftime score should have been bigger because he dropped a touchdown right into Miller's lap that he dropped. And they had to settle for a field goal. And then the last touchdown the Bears got before the half, he had, I think, 6.5 seconds in the pocket because the Giants only rushed 3, and Corey Ballantyne got mossed in the end zone there by Darnell Mooney, and it was just brutal. And then the Bears all of a sudden cannot complete a pass in the second half. It was such a weird 180. I do think they did the right thing sticking with the run, but we saw this with the Giants run defense-wise last week. They eventually wore down in the second half. We see all this emphasis for the Giants front office and Gettleman on hog mollies and these big bodies on the defensive front. We have Dexter Lawrence and Dalvin Tomlinson and B.J. Hill, Leonard Williams, etc. And then all of a sudden on a drive where the Giants really need to get a stop and get the ball back, all of a sudden Montgomery's running it down the Giants' throats. I mean, what's the point of the investment if they're going to be that, giving up 10-yard runs consistently on a very important drive? And then when the Bears had that chop block that pushed them back to 1st and 25, they run Montgomery for 22 yards, and the penalty didn't even matter anymore. So, it was good for the Bears for sticking with the run and effective at the end of the day. And then the Giants' run defense wearing down late second week in a row is a troubling trend because by the time they did eventually get the ball back, it was an entirely different situation.
Yeah, I think 2 good games on the Giants side of things. From the offensive side, I would say Golden Tate probably played the best out of any Giants player outside of maybe Daniel Jones, but even then he looked pretty poor. The defense, I'd probably go with Julian Love. He had a big pick and actually looked decent out there. But those are the 2, Golden Tate, Julian Love. There wasn't a lot to choose from on the Giants side. Maybe you go Deion Lewis, but what do you think of the 2 top players of the game?
No, well, for me, one of them is obvious. It was James Bradbury. He was outstanding. I'll give him a lot of credit. He really did a nice job blanketing Allen Robinson, who only had 3 catches for, I believe, 33 yards on 9 targets. He was basically a non-factor, and Bradbury ended up with, deflecting the first interception that Love ended up with, and then making a ridiculously great play on the interception he ended up with himself. The throw to Robinson on the 50-50 ball, Bradbury wasn't even facing the play, and he just ripped it out of Allen Robinson's hands and stayed in bounds. And that was an amazing play. So far, I have been impressed with him. But the rest of the Giants secondary is just brutal. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, I didn't see enough consistency with Jones there to give him whatever we'd call the game ball on this show. We should get a term for that. But
Yeah.
overall, I'd say I'll be specific here. I'll give it to second half Evan Ingram, who was lined up a lot more out wide and in the slot, finally being more creative with him. Ended up with 6 catches for 65 yards in the second half, and shows how much potential he has in this offense. So I'm hoping he can at least build off that in week 3.
Yeah, I was surprised on the Bears side of things to how much they have ran the ball with Cordero Patterson. I thought that he was someone they can use as like a gadget player, but they're just giving him the ball and running him straight. So I wasn't too fond of what they're doing with him, because outside of David Montgomery, there isn't a like powerhouse back. I mean, you got Tariq Cohen, who's very small and can do a little gadget stuff and maybe make some plays as a scat back. And then you have the versatile, I guess you could say versatile, Cordero Patterson, who's basically just fast and big. But I don't know. I wish they could bring in another running back, maybe like a Lamar Miller, because you've already seen David Montgomery get scuffled a little bit. And with the injuries in the NFL right now, a lot of these backs that are out there aren't going to be out there much longer.
Yeah, well, the injuries were a huge trend across the league at every position. It didn't hit any team harder than the 49ers, I'd say. And I know we'll talk about their game against the Jets here in a few minutes, but to me, it's starting to bring up those questions about how much do you think these injuries are impacted by the lack of practice reps, the complete absence of a preseason? I know that we didn't really see as much of this in week 1, but it was all over the league here in week 2, not just the Giants with Barkley. I mean, we saw Cortland Sutton tear his ACL for the Broncos. We saw Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas do so for the 49ers. And we saw several other pretty significant injuries as well. Drew Lock, for example. I mean, how much of that do you think is on the completely different and truncated offseason the NFL had?
I think it's 100% on it. I was actually going to write a blog post on this for one of my assignments, but I mean, it's so crucial for them, even just to ramp it up. You have the first week, maybe you play a drive or two. Second week, maybe a quarter. Third week, play your half. And then fourth, ease off. Just go back in week 1. It gives you enough to get moving around, more football moves in practice. And I wish some of the teams, obviously it's not smart, but I thought it might have been to prevent some of these. Treat practice the 3 weeks of preseason you usually have. Go full contact outside of the quarterback and just start making plays and start shifting guys around to get them familiar with making those football moves and cuts and all that stuff outside of just going through the motions of practice.
Yeah, now that would definitely be a creative solution. And I'm not trying to blame these coaches or these teams because they were put in an unprecedented situation here. And there's no real protocol to deal with. Hey, what if our entire usual offseason process is completely revolutionized and turned on upside down on its head? So that's going to have an impact on all 32 teams to some extent here, not just by the end of the season, but by the end of this month. And we're going to see more of this. I'm not saying we're going to see it as drastic as 7 different superstars get a serious injury in 1 week, but we will see similar patterns to this for the rest of this season at the very least.
Yeah, and going back to Thursday, you saw C.J. Uzomah, who started to have a breakout year at the tight end position for the Bengals. It looks like Joe Burrow loves his tight end. He keeps throwing it to A.J. Green, but no one's catching it there. But anyway, Uzomah blows out his ACL. There was a ton of ACLs happening over the weekend, and there's a lot of significant injuries. 2 quarterbacks, so it'll be Jeff Driscoll and possibly Nick Mullins in week 2 or week 3, because Garoppolo's sort of week to week. I don't know if they'll rush him back or not, but I hope the quarterback can stay healthy and at least safe, because, man, the drop-off of quarterback play could be significant, especially for a contending team.
Well, why would the 49ers rush Garoppolo back to play the Giants defense? Are you kidding? Nick Mullins has stepped in and won games before, and he'll most likely do it again as long as he doesn't throw at James Bradbury. We saw Corey Ballantyne and Isaac Yadam look like dead Champ Bailey out there. So it's just, they are not a factor defensively, frankly. The Giants have decent safety play at times. Logan Ryan started to make more of an impact in week 2 there, and Love had his moments, although I got to say Jabril Peppers was pretty much invisible in week 2. But the 49ers playing a flawed Giants team, even on their best day, what is their incentive to rush back all of their star players when they very well could win the game regardless? So I doubt that they'll rush him back. I read most recently that he's doubtful for the game week 3, but he could very easily play week 4. And to me, that makes the most sense for them. And then one other point I want to bring up about the Giants game that was a real issue was their third down defense. It was absolutely atrocious, especially in the first half when I believe the Bears converted 7 of their first 9 third downs, but they finished with, I think, 9 or 10 or 11 third down conversions in the game. That last drive where even though the Bears eventually missed a field goal, they converted several third downs and then converted that 4th down on the most Giants play possible with the offensive lineman catching the pass. I mean, are you serious? Just even when the Giants do something right, they get screwed. So it's just, but the third down defense was a backbreaker for so much of the day. The Giants defense somehow managed to pitch a shutout in the second half, but they dig themselves too big of a hole by allowing the Bears to go right down the field at the beginning of the game. And then the piss poor tackling on the Montgomery receiving touchdown, where it was going to be a first down regardless, but they had 3 separate opportunities to keep them out of the end zone. And we saw about Grant Delpit levels of tackling there, and it was just, and it was a very bad start, and it put the Giants in a bad position. We see Jones have the early turnovers again, and that's a concerning theme as well.
Yeah, hopefully they can get things fixed up. I mean, it's going to be interesting. You talked about the 49ers having their injury depth, and they're out 2 running backs. They're going to be without both Raheem Mostert, who is having a fantastic start to the year, going back to the Super Bowl, and then you also have Tevin Coleman, who's going to be out. So it's going to be Jerick McKinnon, who's going to be starting for the first time since 2017, I believe, with the Vikings. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how that plays out for them. Probably promote Jeff Wilson off the practice squad if he's still hanging out with them. But man, it'll be great for the Giants to go in there. I mean, we don't know how it's going to play out, especially with this year. You never know. But
well, McKinnon, I got to say, is a better third running back than most teams have. The Giants' third running back now is literally not even on the roster with Barkley hurt, because all we have is Lewis and Gallman, for example. But the 49ers do absolutely still have a better roster than most to deal with some of these injuries, but I did still think at the beginning of the season they were a bit overrated. I don't think Garoppolo is the best quarterback here, although the Giants have proven they can make any quarterback look good. We did for the first half with Trubisky, so yeah, I wouldn't set the bar too high there, but it's definitely going to have a huge impact on especially these contending teams going forward.
Yeah, I think there's 3 playoff teams out of the NFC West. I think the Seahawks are a lock. They're both of our Super Bowl picks. I also see the Cardinals and the Rams making it out of there.
Yeah, I said the Rams were going to finish last in the division a couple of weeks ago. I still don't think that's out of the question, but if they can at least get 1 or 2 more wins here before they start to come back to earth a little bit, they could absolutely, at the very least, set themselves up for, let's say, 9-10 wins, and especially with the expanded playoffs, that could easily get them in.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about the 49ers. Let's go to their game a few days ago. So we have the Jets losing again to the 49ers this time. Who's going to be the victim next week for the Jets?
Oh, my goodness. The Jets might have been the one team in the league that have been less impressive than the Giants through the first 2 weeks. I mean, my goodness. I've been very critical of Adam Gase even before we started this podcast about what a horrible hire that was. The Jets are one of the most dysfunctional organizations in the NFL from top to bottom. Their ownership, their front office, their coaching staff, and the talent on the roster itself leaves a lot to be desired here. I think the best example is with Jerick McKinnon, speaking of him, getting 55 yards on a 3rd and 31. Are you kidding me? Is there a more Jets play than that? I mean, the Jets played this let's say, a second-string 49ers team in a lot of positions and weren't even close. They got killed. They lost by 18, and it really wasn't that close.
Yeah, I've been very, very disappointed in the play of Sam Darnold. I mean, he's looked like crap. I don't know how much that's a credit to Gase. I'd imagine it's some, but he doesn't have the weapons. He was without Jamison Crowder, so obviously there's something to work with there, but he didn't have the running game. Frank Gore carried it, I think, 22 for 60. He's still chugging away at his yardage totals or whatever he's trying to do, still out there in his old age. But, I mean, Chris Herndon wasn't even a factor. Here's a guy who made 6 catches last week, and on Sunday he only has 1 catch. I mean, what's he doing there? He's obviously the best weapon on the team outside of Crowder that's at least versatile. So I don't know what they're doing.
Well, the Jets, frankly, the Jets don't even know what they're doing, and that's one of the problems. Gase talked about, well, the Jets moved the ball decently at the beginning of the game, and then the injuries hit, and we didn't really know what to do. That is not an NFL caliber answer there. The Jets are not the only team that has to deal with these injuries. Hell, the 49ers, the team they played, had several during the game itself, and they didn't have any of those problems. So the coaching is very poorly reflected there. Talking about Sam Darnold, frankly, I barely think he was a factor in that game. It wouldn't have really mattered who the quarterback was. There was no solid, substantial game plan there. They were basically winging it like you do a high school exhibition game. I don't understand that at all. And then one of the Jets' biggest problems defensively, and there were several. Alec Ogletree is their problem now. The Giants have dealt with him for, I believe, 3 seasons, or might have been 2 seasons. Either way, he missed a lot of tackles and was a liability in coverage for the Giants. The Jets had him on their practice squad, were forced to promote him due to injuries, and he missed a lot of tackles, as did the rest of the team. So some of this is going to reflect on Greg Williams as well, because he has too much of a reputation to have his defense playing this poorly and missing this many tackles 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, another 2017 Los Angeles Ram defender to mess up with the Jets, because you saw Trumaine Johnson rob him. Now you have Alec Ogletree making him upset as well. I bring you to this. Phillip Rivers has thrown a lot of interceptions so far, and that's who the Jets will be playing next week. Do you think that the Jets get an interception on Phillip Rivers?
Yes, I do think they end up with 1 interception on Phillip Rivers. Hell, Pierre Desir had 1 against the 49ers this week, so anything's possible. Rivers is very prone to turning the ball over, but just because the Jets end up with forcing 1 turnover doesn't mean they get a medal for it, and they definitely shouldn't. I talked about, I thought Bless Austin and Marcus May were some of the bright spots for the Jets last week. They both came back to earth. They were getting repeatedly torched, missing tackles. Bradley McDougald, who was Jamal Adams' replacement, was getting burned all over the field, not making plays that were there to be made. It was a rough day for the entire Jets defense. And this is against a 49ers team missing a couple of their skill position players. So there's definitely no excuses for that. And then offensively, Chris Herndon was the only real healthy skill position player they had left, because we already saw Denzel Mims get hurt. We saw Jamison Crowder get hurt here. And then Brashad Perriman got injured as well. So it leaves Chris Hogan, who they just signed a couple weeks ago, as their number 1 wide receiver. Herndon's the one guy who's healthy that was there to start the season, and he dropped more passes than he caught.
Pierre Desir going against his former team with the Colts, so we'll see how that works out, if he's fired up to play them or not. We saw Xavier Rhodes, a former Colt, or a new Colt, playing against the former Vikings. So 2 interesting cornerback comparisons for the Colts the last 2 weeks, but I don't see any positivity for the Jets. I said in the pregame little episode of where we think they're going to finish, I think I said 3-13 or 4-12. I said enough to get Gase fired. And I don't think if they even go 9-7 the rest of the year, I still think Gase is going to be fired.
Well, more importantly, he should be fired, because I want to pose this question. When we see this many missed tackles and missed plays and terrible execution, do you think the Jets players have quit on their coach? Because I think they have.
I think they have. You saw an opposite approach with Dan Quinn, who looked pretty bad in his game. But anyway,
oh, God.
With the Falcons late in the season last year, they played for their head coach. They went all in and just saved his job. But with the Jets, it's like they're going out there and they're just defeated before they step on the field.
Well, then they're defeated when they step on the field too. So I understand, why they might feel that way. But when the fact that they're very clearly unprepared here for, let's say, reasonable and feasible scenarios like injuries or like a long third down conversion that is just completely unacceptable there. And then you have Adam Gase, the head coach of this team, admitting that he didn't really have a way to revitalize the offense once these guys got hurt. I understand that it's difficult, but you at least have to be creative and try something. And Gase has this reputation as a quarterback whisperer. Where did that come from? We've seen Ryan Tannehill, for example, improve drastically since he got out of Adam Gase's clutches in Miami and moved to Tennessee. The only positive thing Gase ever did as a coach or as a coordinator was staying out of Peyton Manning's way in Denver. And I don't know how that this reputation has followed him for this long, because he did a piss poor job in Miami and he's doing an even worse job for the Jets.
Yeah, his only successful year, in my opinion, was the Jay Cutler offense that he ran. And Cutler went back to reunite with him and didn't look too good in Miami. So he's lost his touch, I believe. And I think he's got to be out of the league. So if Adam Gase is fired, I like two names to be the head coach. I like Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator with the Chiefs. And I also like the bold strategy of trying to pull Lincoln Riley out of Oklahoma.
Well, Lincoln Riley has Jets desperation written all over it, but at the same time, we have seen the Cardinals follow a similar blueprint, with Cliff Kingsbury, pulling him from the college ranks. And frankly, I wasn't even a big fan of Kingsbury as a college coach, but I've been more impressed with him in the NFL. He has the perfect quarterback to work with there. At the same time, the Jets would have to give up on Sam Darnold if Lincoln Riley is coming to that team. He is not a fit for that air raid offense at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Did you have one more note on the Jets, you said?
I did. We talked about some bright spots for the Giants in the loss. We talked about some guys for the Bears who had a solid game. And I do want to briefly bring up Jalen Johnson for them. I thought he had a second consecutive solid week. But for me, the one bright spot I could point to the Jets would be Mekhi Becton, the rookie left tackle they have. He's kind of in a similar position to what Andrew Thomas is for the Giants. But I've been very impressed with Becton on that offensive line. He has been able to show some solid ability in both the run game and the passing game. And I absolutely love the mean streak he has and the determination he has to finish his blocks. I really like that. That's what coaches want to see from offensive linemen. So I do think the Jets might have found a very solid offensive tackle there, but he's pretty much the only guy I can point to and give a passing grade on Sunday's game.
Yeah, and Mekhi Becton, he had the reputation out of college of being a run-blocking left tackle, and some were questioning if he had this footwork and ability to be a good pass-blocking left tackle to protect the blind side of someone. So good to see him succeed early on in his career. Hopefully he keeps that up. I mean, he didn't go against Solomon Thomas or Joey Bosa for most of that game, so I don't know how much credit is there, but it's still nice to see him get some success. And for the Bears, my player of the game is David Montgomery.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, Montgomery had a nice impact in the receiving game and then had a lot of big carries on the Bears' final drive. And even though they eventually missed the field goal and didn't score at all, they did take 5.5 minutes off the clock. And by the time the Giants did get the ball back, there were 2 minutes and no timeouts. So it absolutely had a big factor. If the Giants had another couple of plays, who knows what happens.
One last thing before we wrap it up. I don't know why, but the Bears still can't find a kicker that can kick it over 50 yards outside of Robbie Gould. So, I mean, Cairo Santos, he did his job. Of course, he missed the big one, but, man, I'd like to see a kicker for the Bears come in there and just do their job every single week and nail most of the field goals.
Well, not every kicker can be Harrison Butker, man. Not everyone can make the same 55-plus yard field goal 3 times. Graham Gano missed a 57-yarder for the Giants as well, and I understand that kicking in Soldier Field can be more difficult than other stadiums have that reputation to be. But the Bears do, I'm sure, would definitely like to find somebody a little bit more reliable, because they're basically finding Roberto Aguayo and Mike Nugent types here, and that's not really going to cut it.
Yeah, and you see exactly why the Chiefs got rid of Cairo Santos for Harrison Butker when he was brought into their camp. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Click the subscribe button and follow us. Drop the comments below. We love to answer them. If you think we're nuts, please tell us, because we want to hear it. And I appreciate it. You guys have a good one, and we'll see you next week.